All right, so Rucker, let's all of us around the table. Let's kind of talk about how you guys ended up in Virginia, why you decided to make wine here. Obviously, you guys have been here longer than Rucker, but why don't we start with you, Rucker?
The newbie on the block?
Yeah.
Right. You know, these are the two the godfathers of the industry here. So, but for me, it actually started in 2000. I was working in the tech field, going with a tie every day to work, and realized that life wasn't for me, and decided I wanted to work with my hands, be out in nature. My parents grew up in Europe, both Dutch. One was always part of the table. So I contacted Lucy Morton. She had written a book about or she was referenced in a book about how to make $1 million in the wine industry to start with 10 million. And she was the one who was the whistleblower at Phylloxera. So I said, "Oh, Lucy, how like to get into the wine world?" She said, "Stop! Before you do that, you need to apprentice. There are two names I'll give you: Luca at Barboursville, Jim over at Linden. You go work for them, and then you can figure out if you want the wine industry or not." So I was living in Alexandria, contacted Jim. No, we don't do apprenticeships. Contacted him again, stopped by, I don't know how many times I came by here.
A lot.
Finally broke him down. And then 2001 was my first harvest year. I remember coming in August. Yeah, it was August. My first job was doing canopy management on Geneva double curtain. A little bit complex, but basically it's a canopy that hangs down, and my job was to take a little hedger and chop the bottom of these long shoots that had grown into the grass. I think it was his hazing period for me. It was
you can only do it hot afternoons,
sweaty. But within the first week, I was like, "This is what I want to do with my life." And the ability to work with your hands and work with the soils was just magic right away. So then, I started to say, okay, let me try and find a nice site. And I started learning more about the importance of site selection. So I actually looked in Virginia for a while, and this was starting in 2001. But it was, I don't say, nothing really presented itself. So then went out to California, looked in the Sonoma Coast region, looked north of Santa Barbara, where the Santa Rita AVA is now. And what the impetus for me was I wanted to be in a region where good wine was being made, but I felt like you could take it to the next level, where there was a potential to grow. And so those were areas I looked at, but then I stumbled upon our little magic granite hillside, and that's where we ended up. So,
Jim, how'd you end up here?
How'd I get here?
Yeah.
3 minutes. Let's see. We'll go back to the 70s. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, an agricultural volunteer in Africa, and I fell in love with fruit crops, no grapes. Came back, and I'd grown up with wine on the table also, so I had a love for fruit, growing fruit, and a love for wine, so I put it together. Started in more or less my native Ohio, just over the border in Indiana. And I also ended up pruning in the Indiana winter by myself and loved it. I said, "Oh, well, this is good. I like this." And then got a job in Ohio with a real winery and vineyard, and found I just loved the work. But I knew I couldn't make the kind of wine I wanted to in Ohio. Not that it's not possible, but I couldn't sell it. The people then just wanted inexpensive sweet wines. So I said, I've got to go to one of the coasts, mainly because there's a market there. And I also had the sort of Peace Corps pioneer spirit. And I said, let's look at someplace a little exotic. Long story short, job offer in Virginia, and an old Italian guy that he had a vineyard and he wanted to start a winery in the Shenandoah Valley. And I fell in love with it and said, this is where I want to be. So in 83, I bought this place, 85 planted. The rest is history.
Real quick, did you kind of do any testing in terms of site selection? Because it seems like you just magically nailed it.
No, well, you got to remember that I was a vineyard manager. I mean, I was very observant. I was in the vines all the time. When I came to Virginia, there were actually Naked Mountain Winery had a huge influence on me. I became friends with them, and I always saw where that cold air went, and they could ripen really nice. Just there was something about that site, and I realized it was elevation. So at that time, we were more interested. We were talking about microclimates, soils. We knew we had to have a well-drained soil. After that, we were clueless. We had no idea. So I really went more for microclimate and made sure we had hills to drain. But when we started looking at, certain soils for Cabernet versus for Merlot, no idea.
Cool. And look about yourself.
Well, I'm one of those that grew up in a family of winemakers, My father, my uncle, grandfather, my brother graduated at the same school. Beside my grandfather, actually, he didn't graduate there, but he nevertheless had his farm, had a vineyard, made wine. So I grew up into it. 3 brothers. Only one of the 3 ended up following the footsteps of the father. So it doesn't mean that if you're in a family of winemakers, you're going to be a winemaker. I'm sure you got more of a chance than other people to take a shot at it. I ended up liking it, loving it, and I worked, graduated in '82. Between '82 and '90, I worked between quality control to vineyard management, even in sales for 2 years. And I got a chance to work mainly in Piemonte, in the northwest of Italy, work in Spain for a period around Barcelona. I did 6 months in upstate New York, Finger Lakes. I did 6 months in Napa at what used to be Christian Brothers. And then eventually went back to Italy, and the company saw me as a great communicator for quality of wine, for selling wine. So they put me into sales, and I liked it for 2 years because traveling was great and getting to see a new part of the world, especially Europe. But then it was not what I really wanted. I wanted to grow grapes, make wine, and I didn't want to make a lot of it. The company I was working for was very large, and they didn't have a position for me. They could have offered it to me, but they said, well, we have another person, so and so. And so I said, well, I'm out. And I quit, and I sent out about 75 letters with my curriculum to companies I knew that were invested in vineyard. And the first one to reply was the Zanin company from Italy, which has twice the acres of Virginia in Italy. Ownership. In the United States, a beautiful state,
Sure.
And although they did purchase, Bar was in 76, and so they offered me and said, would you like to consult us for 2 months in Virginia? I have no idea where Virginia was exactly on the map. Only view I had was the movie Gone with the Wind in my head. The sound of,
Sure.
Why should I know a lot about Virginia when I'm, grew up in Piemonte, right? And I came and I loved it. I loved it because there was so much to do, so much to understand, so much unknown. And it was so fascinating for me. And that's what I did. I started, put my head into it. Spent the first winter, all winter pruning, just about, because people had no idea how to prune very well. And bale hay in July of '91, among other things. It's a farm. But that's how you get to understand, absorb all that is in the farm, and the rest is a long conversation, which is not part of your question.
So did you take over from Gabrielle?
No, there was another.
It was another person.
Yeah.
So Italy has a couple thousand years head start on Virginia with quality wine growing. California has a 100-year head start on Virginia with quality wine growing. Are there challenges that we face that are truly unusual and truly unique to Virginia, or does every region have its own challenges?
Well, every region has its own challenges, but I think coming from the perspective of 30 years, the biggest challenge was that when I came here, nobody had a clue as to even how to grow grapes and make wine under the best conditions, let alone anything about understanding terroir and what makes sense. So it was a total crapshoot. It was a lot of fun, but we were really naive and had no idea what we were doing. But at the same time, I remember trips to Napa, and right there on Highway 29, this is the Moscato, this is the Gewürztraminer, this is Zinfandel, this is Gamay, this is Cabernet, all right there. So it was sort of the same idea. But what I think it took me a long time to focus, but the defining thing here in Virginia is rain, and that's what's different about us than California. And that's why at first I would go to California a lot to try to learn, and then I realized there's one big difference. That's a huge difference, and that's rain. I need to go in the other direction. I need to start going over to Europe, and that's what we've all been doing now, and understanding that rain influences everything you do, especially site selection and soils and how they absorb and retain the rain. And once you start understanding that, once you start finding the vine balance and the wine balance with that, you can do some wonderful things. But if you don't understand that, you're swimming upstream.
How have you seen the industry change since you've been here? The broad question.
Well, there's a lot more understanding that produce quality in vineyards that are dedicated to quality, because some they're just dedicated to the dollar and they don't care, you know.
Well, I'll go down that road because you guys probably can't as much as me. There's more wineries in Virginia than ever before, but I would argue that the number of quality producers hasn't increased proportionally to the number of total producers.
That's true. We have a friend of ours who's a mutual friend here. His name is Mark Chet. He grew grapes in Long Island, and then he was one of the first pioneers out in Oregon. And he said, you know, that Virginia industry reminded him a lot of Oregon at its beginning part, but there was one main difference. In Oregon, it's relatively difficult to sell your wine. There's not the mid-Atlantic region where you can have people come from the city to buy the wine at the winery. In Virginia, I would argue it's almost too easy to sell the wine. You know, that all of a sudden in Oregon, let's say Sebastian was growing a good wine, we would go, Sebastian, what's so special about this wine? Oh, it's on this type of soil and this. I'd go to my realtor, we got to find a site just like this because it's the best block. And you start looking site selection because you're competing against the wines not just of your neighbor, but you're actually competing against Burgundy, you know, Napa Pinots, Sonoma Coast Pinots. So all of a sudden quality has such an important role. In Virginia, it's still very much what I call a tourism market, where people come out, oh wow, beautiful countryside, I'm going to enjoy the wines, and it's not really focused on the quality. Having said that, though, I think that you know, Jean-Philippe and Eric have been coming. Jean-Philippe's been coming since 2001, and when we first came, we tasted wines from Virginia wineries. And, you know, you'd actually go to tasting rooms and taste some flawed wines, like you know, incorrect wines, unserviceable wines. Today, even at the most commercial winery, I find hard pressed where you would go in there and say this is a bad wine. I think we've reached a point through winery, you know, cellar practices where the wines here in Virginia now are, I think, globally serviceable. I mean, I think it's a fair statement to make.
I would also say that it's a very different market these days, whereas it was a vastly uneducated market for a very, very long time. The last 10 years or so, you started to see people, I mean, the wine drinking market is huge comparatively to 10 years ago, especially Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, etc. And so I think you see also the cultural shift there, whereas people may have used to been drinking things like Moscato all the time, are actually kind of finding nuance in white wines and so on and so forth. So I think that also helps a lot in terms of like boosting just the overall idea that they're going to make better wine in Virginia.
So let's talk about, you look at Oregon, and they had, of course, David Lett, David Adelsheim. They had all sorts of pioneers who were not really promoting themselves, but promoting Oregon. You know, I've always said it's harder to get an Oregon winemaker to talk about his own winery than it is for him to talk about the Willamette Valley. So here, if you guys were to take that notion, all right, let's promote the Virginia wine industry, I think the biggest challenge you would face, and probably Virginia Wine, the state organization faces, is you're promoting wineries that subsist on weddings and bachelorette parties. You know, it's not necessarily in your interest to promote all Virginia wine. You want to promote the wines that belong on a global stage. So how does a rising tide lift all boats if the quality producers aren't proud of everything that there is? Like, how do you kind of square that circle?
Well, usually the wines that are available and out in the marketplace are the best wines. So we have that going for us, and you know that people ask for specific recommendations, which we give. And I think most people are smart enough to kind of understand what's going on in the industry. It's not so unusual than anywhere in the world nowadays. It's just the differences are maybe a little greater from top to bottom here.
Yeah, it's you know, I'm feeling a bit more relaxed about the situation of having different styles. And this happened only late in the past couple of years. I would say I used to be a bit more uptight, and it's like, well, we're going the wrong direction. If we do this, we do that, and I say, you know what? It doesn't really matter,
Right.
because that's what it's the consumer dictating, telling winery what to do. And then you choose. I want this type of consumer or this type of consumer.
Yeah, I mean, people want to
There
drink.
is-
There's
it's like-
people that want to drink chocolate red wine.
It's
and there's
like the
people that want to drink fine
restaurant.
Bordeaux.
It's like the restaurant business. Do you think all the restaurants in Washington are good restaurants or great restaurants? Absolutely not. But there is a group that wants to do well, and you don't need to be 100. You need to be 30, 40. You drive the whole city up. That's what's happening to me with some good producer driving the Virginia up. I think we're not penalized by having those that want to do wedding. That's fine. It's okay. If that's what they want to do that. The one thing I'm still a little concerned is that we need to plant more vineyard. That's the key, because the prices, there's no more grapes available. Prices going up with the risk of quality actually not going up, because as a grower say, hey, there is demand, I'm going to crop more.
Well, you've seen it over the decades, like Puy Frisé, like Pinot Grigio back in the day, where all of a sudden it became popular, and then the growers started overcropping because the prices was high and nobody cared about the quality. They just wanted juice in the bottle, and that's one thing that we're concerned about.
Are we doing enough experimentation in Virginia? I've always noticed that. Look at the 3 wines we have on the table. They're all Bordeaux blends, and Bordeaux has been making wine a lot longer than Virginia. You guys make a Vermentino, Bro makes Nebbiolo. Are there enough wineries saying, hey, let's rethink this? Should we really be making boatloads of, an ocean of Viognier in Virginia? Should we be making an ocean of Cabernet Franc in Virginia? Do we really know what grows best here yet?
Well, we know some of the grapes that do well, and we're lucky that those grapes are good grapes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't ignore that. That you have solid varieties that are internationally accepted that make really good wine, and they do well here, so come on. What are you going to do?
Absolutely. The one thing that you mentioned earlier is very important, is that earlier we were planting, looking at microclimate, some general, but then him and people like him that have been growing for a few years, they observe, they listen to what your area tells you, and according to what you hear, you change. We really have learned which grapes grow where. And we're working with grapes in Virginia that are worldwide make some of the best wine you can put your hands on. But he knows very well that some of his side here, it doesn't support this grape, but that grape on the other side does very well. And that's something you can only figure out when you do it. I mean, even you have planted with all your consulting you had, there's still a block that you think 2 blocks. 2 blocks is still, and I'm not saying because you didn't do a good job. No, I'm just telling you, even if you think you can read about it and have all the opinion, still, unless you work on your place, you're not going to figure out.
Decades.
Yeah.
You got to learn your place.
So it's going to get better because there's more people like
yeah, but I read little articles on Virginia. They say, well, the wines are getting better because the grapevines are getting older. I said, no. That has nothing to do with it. The wines are getting better because the grape growers are getting
There
older.
are old vineyards that make crap wine.
Yeah, I mean, my best wines for the Hard Scrabble is young vines, because I finally figured out where to plant the vines, and the old ones are being ripped out because I planted wrong.
You still have to save some of your 30-year-old vines.
Oh, the Chardonnay will definitely save it, but all the reds are gone.
So what do you think is going to happen in terms of the grape shortage? In terms of how are you going to make more grapes, or how is the state going to try and help?
But you see, what's interesting is when you look at the high-end producers in the state, they're not affected.
Sure, of course not.
Because they control their grapes.
Right.
So it's all the wedding wineries.
Oh, okay. Well then.
Right.
Well, then let them deal with it.
My only comment to that was, indeed, we have agreed that the quality level of Virginia wine has risen dramatically, and so it's hard to find a bad wine. There's still a few. But for that to improve, we need good quality grapes still available. If you start going down with the quality of the grape, then you may end up seeing a little more of those grapes, but at the same time, there's a lot of new upcoming vineyard that really want to do well. So you're going to have both forces pushing, but you know.
Yeah, the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years will be interesting. There's a lot more vineyards going in now.
There's a lot of
in
planting.
response, but
A lot of planting
the
going
next
on.
3 years is going to be tight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the vineyards that are coming in, are those growers that care about quality?
It's all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah, there's some that are doing their homework and on the right track, and there's others that are just like, we need more grapes. Plant. There's a field.
Let's talk about the big city market, because aside from tourists, that's where obviously most of the wine is sold. How has the local movement tapped into, like, have you guys been able to tap into the eat local movement? Because I would argue that there's still a disconnect. People are still buying fruit and vegetables at their farmer's market. But they don't feel that way about wine. Luca, you look upset about this.
I'm a little concerned about the misuse of the word local, sustainable,
Sure.
all the garbage. I'm sorry. There is no more easy access to a local product than wine and beer. Beer, kind of, because the grain comes from all over the place. And still is one of the product that was last to be brought into a lot of what they claim being great restaurants of DC or Richmond or whatever. Oh, we have to walk on this and that, and then the wine is
Sure.
not even wine. So I've been fighting that for years, meaning fighting it verbally, which is, oh, it's happening. I'm glad it's happening. But boy, it took forever.
But you've also
But,
noticed this
you know,
disconnect.
and I'm fortunate is that, you know, there is the restaurant that's been doing it for a long time. But then some other, it's like using a word for marketing purposes, regardless of how you behave in the kitchen or how you do your purchasing. You know, we have Winemakers in the same condition. They say things, oh, we don't do this, we don't do that, but then they do it. Like, you know, we don't irrigate. But then they have a drip system. You look at it and say, wait, a drip irrigation system.
Yeah.
So what's wrong beside to irrigate a vineyard if you don't have rain? So anyway, there is a little disconnect,
There's a
and
huge
it drives me a
disconnect.
little crazy.
But actually, relatively though, because I've been here a while and I'm close to DC. Oh my God, the differences I've seen are phenomenally good.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow,
Very good.
just especially in the last 5 years.
Yes.
It's been just amazing. I mean, I gave up trying to actively sell to DC restaurants just because that's not what I want. I want to be out in the vineyard and not knocking doors. So but I still wanted them available. So if somebody was interested, like Sebastian, that they could get them. It wasn't like impossible to get them. And just doing that has been pretty phenomenal, the response we've gotten.
But these guys opened up a lot of doors for me and paved the way. But I still think at a $100 price point, people don't give a crap that it's from Virginia. And if anything, it still, for me, is our biggest challenge.
Well-
is the marketing perception of Virginia wine at that price point.
Let's talk about prices in Virginia. People all the time say Virginia wines are too expensive for what they are. Others will say, actually, no, they're well priced or affordable for what they are. Should Virginia wines come with a built-in discount? Just because when you're going to a high-end restaurant, I mean, you face this challenge all the
Let's start
time.
with it. So when we came out, and pricing of wine is challenging. So because the amount you invest in there, you're not going to pay yourself back. It's a long-term exercise. But when we priced the wines, I had Eric and Jean-Philippe, the consultants, and we tasted the wine. They said, this is in the game, and being in the game is in that $100 price league, because it's very difficult to tell a price, as everyone knows, between 100 and 150, and it's what do you call it? So the wine was in the game. Had Andy Erickson, Winemakers, Scream Eagle, no tie, not on payroll, so sure, $100. And a handful of Charles Thomas over at Quintessa, $100. So I came back, and the 120 was the consensus. Came back and I priced it at $88. Why? And the French team were really disappointed. They first joked with me, 88 for the Chinese. No, it's not for the Chinese. 88 is because I discounted Virginia. I said I have to discount because I don't believe in ourselves. This wine, it might not be for everyone's style, but I would put it up against any wine produced here in the United States. And I think it holds its own. you know, and I think at $100 is a fair price for it. And I'm not bashful, and it used to be the #1 topic of conversation, but I don't get that pushback anymore.
So Jim, I saw you shaking your head, so I don't know if I misinterpreted you, but if you go to a restaurant, if you're a wine director like Sebastian, and someone comes in asking for a Sonoma Coast Chardonnay, and the wine director says, I've got a great one for you, but how about I show you a great Virginia Chardonnay, and if you like cool climate Sonoma Coast Chards, this Linden Avena Chardonnay is going to knock your socks off. Don't you think it's easier to make that sale if you say, plus, it's $15 less on the list?
For me, and I'm going to speak the way that I do things in the restaurant. I'm a very different wine director. A lot of you know, but the way that I approach things is an understatement. It's just the way that I approach things is more about changing people's perspective. So it's never about me bringing over a bottle of wine from Virginia. It's always hearing about what they like, not telling them what I'm bringing, opening the bottle, having them taste it, and then explaining where it's from. Because there's a preconceived notion no matter what when it's from Virginia, and it's not, because I had that preconceived notion for a long time. I think everybody has a preconceived notion for a long period of time because everybody was exposed to all that garbage wine that was around for so long. But it's in my best interest to help you guys and to promote you guys and to change people's minds a little bit, you know. And that's the only way that I can do it. I don't think doing a discount thing makes a difference. There's no difference between $40 and $50 on a bottle of wine, at least to me. Like, you know, if I'm in a store, the $5 difference isn't going to make or break me. So
my philosophy has always been to try to price on a global level, meaning, and one thing I've done is try to train my palate such that I can tell the difference, which isn't as easy as you guys know. So I feel like my palate's experienced enough to be able to taste through a flight of Chardonnays at a certain price point and mine and decide that I'm in the ballpark there.
Right.
Or maybe I need to raise the price up a little bit. So that's what I try to do. I don't taste against other Virginia wines, I taste globally.
As you should. I mean, that's absolutely how people, winemakers should make wine. It's funny in California. In California, everybody just drinks California wine. I was making wine over there. I was like, what are you guys doing? Like, start drinking some other stuff. But you can tell, and I don't think you get that from a lot of Virginia winemakers, the fact that you guys are extremely global in terms of your approach to winemaking. But that's why your wines are not what everybody expects. I mean, all three of you guys make really lean, really well balanced, high acid, very fresh wines, and it's not what anybody expects. And so I find it very, very exciting.
But in the global wine conversation, people have to want Virginia. Like, terroir matters when people go to a restaurant and want Pinot. If they're an educated consumer, they say, I want Burgundy, or I want Sonoma, or I want Carneros, or maybe I want, you know, Oregon or South Africa, or wherever it is. So for a consumer to show up and say, I want a Virginia red blend, they have to know what that means, don't they?
No, I think people like to discover new things too. And I think that to me is a little bit, you know, again, there are a lot of people at that, you know, I talk about the $100 price point, and that is, I think, a little bit of a different market. You know, and a lot of times people do that to show off to their friends. But I think there's also a wave of people who, you know, we get great stories where our wines pour blind to people, and people mistake it for XYZ wine and can't believe it's a Virginia wine. And that they feel like heroes that they discovered something new. I think we can use that to our advantage. You know, you say, for me, I joke with people, Virginia is actually where viticulture started. You know, Thomas Jefferson, but even the colonialists, they were required to plant grapes. I mean, there's a great history. I went down to Williamsburg to give a talk, and I was like, you know what, people, this is where it started. It took us several hundred years, and finally when these guys came aboard, that, okay, now we're starting to get it, but our history is planted way back when, and the roots from what's going on in California started here in Virginia, in Jamestown. And to me, that's pretty cool. And I'd want to drink something that history, with that longevity.
So, Luca, let's pose this to you. A diner in Chicago, a diner in New York, how do you get that person to say, I'd like a bottle, I want something from Virginia, what do you got?
You have to identify restaurant. They have audacious, intelligent wine buyer. They're not prejudiced and they're not lazy. Just lazy means the lazy one are the one that just buy the easy, famous wines, and they put them on the list and they jack them up, and that's the restaurant I don't want to be in. I don't want to be in it. I can make a couple of names in New York, but I'm not. A very famous restaurant that I was told from the owner, we have to be in this. Two famous restaurants are great. I visit them. It was a waste of time. And then I realized, what if I even, my octagon goes on the list, doesn't I sit there in a big book? Who cares? And then we started looking at a restaurant in Brooklyn. Like,
There you go.
fantastic restaurant. Poured wine by the glass. I got people coming to visit the vineyard from it. I got the local writers finding out, and that's how you build excitement, is not by being on the famous wine list, to me, at least the way I see it. And that helped a lot. And pricing is the most difficult thing to do in our business. And market does make a big difference indeed. Where I hear comments, our wines are actually, for the quality, are very affordable, is in New York, is in Chicago. It's not as much locally because it's more like, I have other options perhaps. But we still have room to grow. I believe as a vineyard, as a producer, but also I believe a market should produce wine at different levels of prices, because people don't drink expensive wine every day. But they have to be, judiciously priced. And I think the quality and price ratio is definitely improved in Virginia in the past 10 years dramatically, and some wines actually are underpriced.
Do we face challenges that the old world doesn't? I mean, land here is tremendously expensive. Labor here is tremendously expensive. Look at a place like
the labor, I would argue, is for compared to the old world. Like, I'd rather have our labor. Like, my joke is to bring my team to Bordeaux. We'd run circles around them, and at a much more equitable, or not at a more affordable price. I think labor, they have challenges.
Okay.
They do.
They do. Yeah, and land, I mean, that's where you get into the haves and have-nots.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's been passed down generation to generation, so there's
Yeah,
no.
But if
the
you're,
don't
if
chop
you're a
that.
classified growth,
Yeah,
the
it's
land is
very
very. If you are in Entre de Mer, where the other, because in Bordeaux, and that's kind of a little bit. There are 3,000 chateaus there. I go there twice a year. I can name 100 of them, maybe.
Right.
You only know the top of the top. There's a lot of. You have plum wine, but it's not really, but it's fun,
But some of them are
Yeah.
potential, but they cannot get out of that statement of being a lesser place. It's really tough. And some are planted in the wrong place, really.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, they can make everyday wine. And
But some of them, like in Côte de Castillon, so satellite of Saint-Emilion, it's just a little bit of their spirit is that they are on a limestone plateau, very similar to where Ausson is. So why are you not making the same? Oh no, I'm only Côte de Castillon. I was born like this, and that we love very much about the American spirit. You don't think I can produce a great wine in Virginia? Let's go try it out.
It's true.
You use the word pioneer in your talk, or your opening remark. I mean, I think that there's that great American spirit.
Everybody keeps coming back to the weather in Virginia. Oh, the weather here, the weather there, and I'm like, no. It's not about the weather. The weather's in our favor, and that's a shift I've had to take. I used to go out to California and say, "Oh, it's so easy here. You guys can do such a good job, and we have rain and blah blah."
we don't have diseases like they do.
But now, you go over to Europe, like in Burgundy, the last 3 years. Oh my
Yeah.
God,
Getting
it's
killed.
poor.
Yeah.
Well, we had a mind shift too a little bit in 2001 when I started. It was we can't ripen grapes, and I even remember talking to Luca about you can't ripen. We were talking about ripening Cabernet Sauvignon. Now I'm under the belief, when tasting the wines and the direction we want to move is, we look to toning down the ripening in the sense of not as aggressively leaf pulling, picking earlier, in the sense of sometimes like our 2010 Rendezvous, it's a wine that is very Californiesque. And from my palate, I would have want more restraint in that wine, but the market likes it. So, but I mean, so what we talked about, we're thinking about strategies now about not as aggressively leaf pulling. Maybe we have irrigation, maybe watering the Merlot a little bit to push it later on in the season. So I don't know what your guys' take on it, but I think we can ripen the fruit here. I think the sites that the vegetative cycle is too aggressive, you can do what you want, you'll never make a good wine.
I tell people all the time, we are on the latitude of North Africa here. We really are. Look it on a map. So we do have, on average, plenty of heat and plenty of light to ripen a lot of things. It depends what soil you put them in, you combine them with. You know, here you have a lot of rain and sun, and you have a vigorous growing plant and a vigorous soil. The plant eats like crazy. It makes a lot of leaves and doesn't ripen the grapes very well.
You know, that's the thing that is so difficult to explain to, even to our colleagues, about the relationship of soil to vine because of our rain situation. And it's huge, but you have to live through it. You have to observe it and taste it. And if we could get that single concept through to all these newbies coming in, it would elevate tremendously.
Yeah.
That more than
I
anything
compare
else.
that to people. You know, you have a person that likes to eat all the time. Well, if you put that person in front of a table with full of food, it's gonna, you know, show it. If you have a person that it's actually not a good eater, never hungry, you have to entice it, and that's where you put Merlot on a more vigorous soil, and you put Cabernet on a weak soil. Then the rain makes the difference too, because that's how they feed. Is they need water, and therefore, you know, if you are in a place where, like we are, a lot of clay, well, Merlot.
Yeah.
And Cab, 2 years out of 10 a great Cab. The rest is going to be a good Cab, not bad, but
Yeah, where
more
you
simple.
are, but
Yeah.
but then up here with the more granite soils, better drained, then Cabernet's king.
yeah.
But not. I have 76 acres of land on my farm, and only 5, maybe 7, are good cab land. And believe me,
How much do you have planted in total?
we have about 20 acres here. But I've now pulled out anything else that grows in that soil in those 5 acres because it's cap's got to go there.
Has anybody tried to grow Gamay?
Why?
Granted.
I know, but sure, I'll take out my cab that sells for 50
Well, no,
bucks
no,
a
no.
bottle. Like Gamay.
If you got like a place with some granite on it, you know, throw a couple
I
Gamays there, see
understand.
what
Well,
happens.
Syrah the same way.
Yeah,
I mean,
Syrah,
but-
yeah.
But
Well, yeah, you see Black Ankle in Maryland. They're sort of, is it the same ridgeline?
I
Is
think
it
so.
similar?
they're a little. Their soil actually they have beautiful soils.
Yeah.
Places, I mean, I'm shocked how well
The
they-
soils are really
I
nice.
can't believe how good those wines are.
They're very good.
Really shockingly good.
Great Syrah and great Alvarinho.
Yeah.
But you see, that's a case of people that were wine drinkers before. They're intelligent people. They understood what was important.
Right.
They got somewhat lucky because they knew they had a good site, but it was
They
even
had that
better
farm,
than
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And they're rocking because
Here.
they're doing everything right, but because the soil is really.
My mother's best friend owns the 90-acre farm next door, and I'm like,
Yeah.
go.
No, there's some beautiful soils. We're talking about Black Ankle.
Oh yeah.
Oh, covered.
So let's talk about what you guys don't enjoy about the local conversation. Because if I were in your shoes,
Here we go. Rucker, don't you have a meeting to go to?
because if I were in your shoes, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you want to promote Virginia, we want to say, hey, we're pioneers, we're doing something different. On the other hand, if you're out there talking about Virginia wine, a lot of questions and producers are going to come up that you don't want to talk about. And it's not that you have no interest in being unkind or undiplomatic towards your neighbors. And people are undoubtedly, you know, when they talk about visiting Linden or RDV, you know, there's a lot of Northern Virginia wineries that you probably don't want to send people. So there's got to be a lot of parts of the local conversation that you were not excited about.
It's not as difficult as it used to be for me because as Luca has, I've made peace with it. Not everybody's going to produce a style of wine, a quality of wine that I'd like to see, but it's true in all regions, as Rucker was saying about Bordeaux. So it's like that's fine. People will get introduced there, and hopefully they'll move on.
For me, it's not a comparison though of like I don't compare myself to Barbersville or Linden. I feel like the 3 wineries here are more international, and I compare myself more. It's not but I consider myself part of a global community, like people like Charles Thomas. He's the Quintessa is a friend of mine. I have a lot of friends in Bordeaux, so it's a more global thing. But I can tell you what gives me the nails on a chalkboard. Not bad for Virginia wine. To me is extremely insulting, and I used to be quiet about it. I say, you know what, this is not bad for a global wine. This is a world class. You know, I think this competes with the top wines around the world. And if you don't think so, let's put a brown bag. And I do these brown bag tastings not to insult other wineries, because I find it a little bit. Case van Leeuwen, who is the viticulturist at Cheval Blanc, goes, why do you guys always in the New World compare us to the wines of the first growth? And then started already with that great tasting in '76, the tasting in Paris. But you have to have a benchmark, and unless someone like a Parker or a Wine Spectator says 95 points, everyone, ooh, Virginia, I don't know. But that to me is my heart. But it's getting better. I used to get introduced. Oh, one of the top wine growers in Virginia. Now it's changed at this fancy club in Washington, D.C. One of the best wine growers of Cabernet in the country. I was like, wow, I'll remember that introduction. and it's changed. I mean, these wines don't belong just in the state of Virginia. These wines belong on the table in Chicago, on the table in California. We got asked to pour our wines at the Ferry Building in San Francisco at a price point incredibly high, but they're doing it. So.
Well, that sort of brings me to a question something that I've kind of posed to you guys a couple of times. How do we get something like the Ferry Building situation happening in DC? And
in what sense? You mean a big?
There needs to be a Virginia-based tasting room in Washington, and there needs to be.
They bring all winemakers in.
Okay. It just doesn't make any sense.
You mean not just a one-time thing, but
no,
a daily?
I mean like a daily thing.
It takes an entrepreneur to do it.
Yeah, and I'm willing to be that guy. And I just think
we're talking business now.
Sort of, but I mean, I think it's important. Like, I just don't understand how there's not the understanding from the DC public that their Sonoma and their Napa are a day's drive, and they're a shot out the city. And it's easy to get to. It's fun to do. There's incredible wines that are really close, and I just don't think that there's enough. I don't know if it's a lack of support from Virginia itself. I don't know if it's.
Well, one of the logistical problems is not just the licensing, which we've talked about before, but the availability.
Sure. That's true. That's true. I mean, you guys.
I mean, that was something I would support. I'm assuming wouldn't sell a tremendous amount of wine.
No.
But a lot of people say, oh no, I'm selling it all top dollar at my tasting room, so why should I do that?
Right.
It's all about, to me, it's all about experience from the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of it, but most of the results we can achieve is by people having a great experience tasting Virginia wines, and wherever they go, it's the vineyard, it's the restaurant, and those are the ones that pass on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the media that helps to talk about it, promote about it, tell, oh, there is this event going on, there is this vineyard that is doing this. But ultimately it comes to the experience that people have. I think it'd be hard to get there any other way. Even the Wine Spectator and Parker, if they get a couple of big points, it's going to help, but it's not going to be enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think also people are learning that it's not only those points that makes the district. I mean, there's so many districts already. I think we're a little late for the big magazines to bring us from here to there.
No, I
don't want to get there that way.
Yeah,
well,
we
don't have enough strength in numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we are more like the underrated. I was at the Wine Spectator event, New York and Washington, the only Virginia winery pouring, and I have people, this is the most underrated wine today at the whole show, and they taste maybe 50, 60 wines. And actually I like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like that, and I like to be able to get there without have a strong push from one magazine or the other.
Sure.
I don't despise it at all. I say, great. They should have already done it by now.
I would argue that I see more New York State wines in DC than I see Virginia wines. I mean, I'm shown a lot of New York State wine. And it's not to say that New York State wine isn't great.
Both
and they
Long
make some good
Island
stuff.
and Finger Lakes?
Long Island, Finger Lakes, yeah. But I mean, you guys are in my backyard, I just don't, I don't understand the lack of push, not from you, but, from the state itself. Like, I think it's something that the state itself should be super proud of and kind of at the forefront. I mean, it should be a huge amount of tourism and things of that nature.
I believe strongly that I'm not in a hurry to get there, to get more recognized now or in 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
But I know every year the knowledge and appreciation for wine is increasing. Is increasing. And it becomes to us as producers to still be able to produce that experience and the quality of the people, and the restaurant to promote the wine with the right courses, with the right attitude.
And I'm a much smaller operation in Barboursville, and what I've found, and a lot of it has to do with personality, is that I want to be out there, and I don't want to be in DC. So once I became financially okay, I said, I'm not going into DC.
Right.
I don't want to do that, but I want my wines there. And I realize I'm not naive. I know that if I'm not there knocking on doors, I'm not going to sell that much. But that's okay. So, I've sort of made peace with all that, where it's available if people want it. If people want to come out here, meaning sommeliers, restaurateurs, I'd love to sit down with them and show them around. I really enjoy that. But I'm not going to go. I'm not going to have a salesperson. I'm not going to do all that.
No, nor should you. I just think that there needs to be more of a push in terms of.
Well, to go down that road just a little bit, you don't like being known as a great wine grower in Virginia. You don't like your cab being great for Virginia. But isn't there a real value there because we're so close to the DC market, because you're all pioneers, the three of you, you're all part of a conversation, oh yeah, this is the best Virginia has to offer. Isn't there a huge value in that? I guess I posed that to you first because you're the one who doesn't really like the comparison.
I think there's two. One, I'm less patient than Luca, because I think that a high price or a high point by a well-known thing will add instant validation. I will say that like my peers aren't just we get together here and we have a great time, and every time I leave I'm remiss a little bit. You know what? We need to get more times together to talk. But I talk more to people in Bordeaux than except for Jim, than any other winemaker, and just to be pigeonholed in Virginia is small. Jim is the only other person in the state of Virginia, except occasionally with Luca, to talk to, where you can actually talk the techniques and the thought behind the viticulture and the winemaking. And I don't want to be pigeonholed like that. I think that that RDV has much more to offer, and it really is a wine that should be considered on the global market, not just Virginia. That's my 2 cents. I will argue, I agree with Luca, where we have a big benefit too, is that we're finally seeing this at the beginning. Our business plan was keep the doors closed, no one's allowed to come into the winery. And I recently went out to California, all to the big names, from Harlan to Chauncey, all high scoring points. And all of them said our number one focus right now is hospitality, is to give what Luca an experience to the customers. Just like sitting here, what a beautiful view, and then they become real ambassadors or real agents for your wine. And that's what we're focusing on now. Do we have to put balloons at the end of everything? No, but is there a way to do it just like this, a very high-end way of presenting our wines and serving
Some of
wines?
our best buyers historically have come suggested by restaurants. Starting from Charlottesville, Richmond, New York, Washington, Iloilo, Washington.
Yeah,
because somebody at the restaurant said, oh, by the way, and people may have never tasted Virginia wine, say, oh, by the way, say, oh my gosh, it's good. Where
This is
Virginia
Redhead.
wine? It's down the road. and some of the best buyers, and really appreciative of quality as much as the sommelier that suggested the wine to that person.
Jim, for more years.
And it is all about the experience that these people go through. I mean, we're all after that in life anyway, aren't we?
Sure.
We want experience life well. So,
Yeah, you don't want to buy a brand, you want to buy
yes,
place.
something.
For more years than anyone else at this table, you've been the producer that wine knowledgeable people in DC have said, oh, if you want to prove to yourself that Virginia can make good wine, get yourself out to London. You've been part of that conversation for several decades now. So do you enjoy being called one of the best in Virginia?
Well, okay.
And obviously it's a more complicated question than it seems.
To tell you the truth, of course. I mean, who doesn't have some kind of ego? But more importantly, in a business standpoint, I don't care for the marketing end of it at all. That's just my nature. So the more reputation I can get, it just makes the selling and the marketing easier, so I can spend more time here. It's about that simple.
I think there's also a difference between saying good for Virginia rather than, being the best in Virginia. Like saying for Virginia means you're like the redheaded stepchild of the wine world, rather than like being the best in Virginia.
No,
or it kind of like gives it some power.
Sure. Over the decades, the biggest immediate impact we've ever had from the press is always a blind tasting,
Right.
where there's a bunch of wines thrown in from all over the world, and ours does well, and somebody prints it in the Washington Post or whatever. Boom. There was one time when we had the flight of Chardonnays, and our Chardonnay did really well, and people came out, and then they did a flight of reds, and our hardscrabble didn't do well at all. It was towards the bottom, but people didn't care. It was mentioned, so they come out. Yeah, I'll take 2 cases of that, 2 cases of that. Like, okay, doesn't matter.
Certain.
It was in the tasting. That's all that counted.
Fun stuff, man. I mean, these are across the board really lovely too. You can tell you're Italian with this. Which is super awesome.
This is a $15 bottle of wine. Okay.
Yeah,
Is it really?
And that's
Really?
Yeah, this is our cab that
man.
we grow in a
Super pretty.
clay soil. Doesn't make that rich and deep because we can't unless it's a very dry year.
It's so nice. It's delicate. You can tell you're from Piedmont, actually.
Yeah, well, there's a.
acidity and tannin.
It'd be hard to sell 40,000 cases at $50, $100 bottle.
That's true. That's true.
So what are you guys excited about? You said the next 3 to 5 years are going to be tremendous for the whole industry with regards to the number of new vineyards going in, the degree of seriousness.
Yeah,
that
I
growers have.
see that the people sort of more at the top of keep fine tuning, which is extremely important. I mean, fine tuning means a lot. And then I know of several vineyards that are planted or recently planted that will be producing some nice fruit, and that makes me excited.
I hate to use the word inequality, but do you see, kind of like a barbell almost, in that there's a handful of producers, or not even barbell, a pyramid, handful of producers at the top, and it's almost the distance between the guys at the top and the people with balloons at the end of the driveway. That's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, it's getting bigger in terms of, if you look at the number of wineries, but most of those wineries are just little weekend things that they're not producing much, if any, really. When we look at the actual production numbers, then it's pretty solid. It's a solid pyramid. It's not doing this at all. I think it's, hopefully it will, turn out to, I don't know what geometry, what's the four-sided, where you got a big place at the top. It's not easy. It's not easy to make wine of a certain caliber. It's not easy anywhere.
The one that scares me the most is when you see winery making a substantial investment in vineyards, and you hear they change winemaker and vineyard manager every couple of years. It's like, oh my gosh, that's disaster. Right there is disaster.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're down in
There's a
Charlottesville.
lot of people that are starting to understand how things work.
You got to understand
and
the
then
vineyard, and to do it in 4 or 5 years is impossible. Let alone
it's
in a couple years, you have no idea what's going on.
Right.
You're down near Charlottesville, where you've got Claude Thibault doing great stuff. You've got the team at Early Mountain working really hard to promote Virginia wine. Talk about those efforts. Like, how's the Charlottesville wine industry going, and is it,
Well, you mentioned 2, but you left out a lot of others that are actually, I would say, even doing more for a longer time than those 2 you mentioned. There is a very good core group of people, very dedicated, and a lot of us working a lot on Bordeaux varietals with different soil types, different blends going in place. I have to say, down there we're more toward Merlot Cabernet Franc. That's where the greatness is coming due to the clay soil we have. And there's a good number of vineyards approaching being close to 20-year-old, and being in ownership and management from same group of people. So I see a lot of consistency. I see the consistency increasing dramatically, and some new vineyard coming in. So things are good. Things are good, I have to say. And yes, there's a few people that they build their wedding facility because they have a 1,000-acre farm, but really, doesn't bother me as long as you make great wines and you can have that. Why not? People will come, enjoy, have a great day, a beautiful wedding in the vineyard. They have great wines on the table. To me, it's fantastic.
Charlottesville, I think, has a slight almost advantage to Northern Virginia in that they're a little bit further from DC. So in Virginia, you have all these pop-up mom and pop, what I call virtual wineries, just popping up that aren't doing much anything except for getting the buses and things, because it's so easy. Where Charlottesville, you know, people from DC that aren't really into wine, just want the experience, they're going to look at the map and say, well, we can drive an hour and be in the heart of Northern Virginia, but we got to drive almost 2 hours. So they'll go to Northern Virginia. So I think in some ways Charlottesville wineries have to work a little bit harder and have to be a little bit more serious.
But I also think it's very interesting that you have this like microcosm of like, you know, I haven't had any of the Double Plain Cellar stuff yet, but you know, friends tell me it's doing quite well. You got you guys, you got RDB. It seems like this little nook is really pushing real hard, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a lot of other little mom and pop wineries.
Yeah, I visited Vintage Ridge the other day, and it's just a beautiful facility, but it didn't seem like
it's for sale, so they're kind of lost their interest.
it's too expensive.
I don't know. We just kind of focus. We don't look over our shoulders that much anymore. We just kind of do what we're doing.
But it's cool. It sort of seems like there's like everybody's pushing each other a little bit, and everybody's trying to get better, which is important.
And Jim, you've now had this apprentice program for just over a decade, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's taken many turns and twists along the way.
And are the folks that have trained under you, are they still here making wine? Or?
Not all of them, but a lot of them, and that was my whole reason for doing this. A brief history, I used to work with a university in Montpellier in France, and they would bring out stagiaires for 10 weeks, and then I'm saying, well, why am I sort of training the French? You know, I mean, this makes no sense. I got all this, you know, these people that are clueless right in my neighborhood, and I got French people working for me. So I decided to start focusing on closer to home and hopefully getting people that will stay in the industry in the locality, which is not easy. You don't know. And in fact, now my program has changed a little bit more to what I call journeyman rather than apprentice. I'm only looking at people who've worked a couple years in the industry in Virginia to know that for sure they're going to stay in this industry and hopefully stay in Virginia, because it's a lot of effort on my part. And the whole idea is to get people like Rucker and Josh and people that are here that I can be my colleagues and I can learn from.
Rucker, what are you excited about without looking at RDB?
When I listen to Jim and Luca talk, I think there's a that they're very happy in their own skin. They're very calm and very I guess Zen-like almost. And I look forward to reaching that stage where the noise outside doesn't bother me. I'm still a little bit more the adolescent here where. I want to fight. You said bad thing about Virginia. Now these guys are cool, calm. So I'm looking forward to be the cool, calm guy.
Sebastian, anything else? Wrap it up.
No, I mean, other than thank you guys so much. It's a great honor for you to sit at the table with us. Truly appreciate your time. And the wines were delicious.
Yeah, they were. The nose on the Barbizon is so pretty.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I've learned a lot from is the prettiness of the fruit come through, and don't mess with it so much.
Yeah.
Just make really elegant wines. You don't need all the oak, and just let the freshness come through. And that's what we can do, and that's what I've sort of learned is what's our advantage. If you look at it purely on economics, what's our advantage? We can't do what California does, even if we wanted to. But we can make a style that's very fresh and elegant and long. Hey, nothing wrong with that. That's what I like.
It's working.
Let me turn the question on you just.
Sure.
So you obviously are very involved with the wine world, globally, and in your blog, and you and your restaurant. What's your take on the Virginia wine industry? And if you were the head of it, the pope of the industry, what would you change? Or
if I were the pope of the industry, I think I would have an incredibly challenging job because you can't play favorites. And that's why I think the Governor's Cup, which I'm sure, I guess all of you are now a part of, that or competing for that. You're
No,
not.
and I'm not.
And you're not anymore.
We did
You did
1 year
once.
to try it, but we chose not to do it anymore.
So to me, that was a really good idea, because if you're the Virginia Wine Board, you have no choice but to, you can't play favorites.
Yeah.
You have to treat everyone the same. So by doing a blind competition with people who drink a lot of wine, in theory, the best wines will end up in a case, and then the state of Virginia can dedicate all of its efforts to promoting the wines in the case, and they can say to the folks who don't make the case, hey, sorry, you didn't make it. So I think that's a really smart tactic on their part. That's what if I, so.
See, but my argument with that is you have Glen Manor won 1 year, was the Governor's Cup. The next year they didn't even make the case. Does that
Sure.
mean that they're not doing a good job? No, and I don't think.
And that's the problem with any large blind tasting.
And for me, I think it's much more effective is to say, and that's a great system in Bordeaux. They have a hierarchy, but they just don't look at 1 year and say, hey, this is the classification. They have the top wines, and they say, and one can argue with it, but they're the ones who lead the rest through, and that stays pretty standard with those top wineries. I
Sure.
feel like with the Governor's Cup, you get a case, to some reporter in, I don't know, Chicago, gets on there. Next year, it's a different case. It's about relationships. It's about meeting Luca and Jim and seeing what they've done and understanding that and tasting back. Hey, look at this. This is even a young wine, but tasting the older wines. Then all of a sudden, wow, like your 2001 when we tasted. That's what I would send to reporters and understand what our
And I think
potential
my second answer would be, all right, so I'm not at the Virginia, now I'm giving you guys advice. I think you guys are especially, doing the right thing by getting to know the restaurant buyers, getting to know the somms, because all those people can be evangelists for your brand. They can be brand ambassadors for you. What you want is the person in DC, because they're in your backyard, to say, I'm stocking my cellar with Linden Hardscrabble Cab.
Well,
And then when they go hang out with their wine drinking buddies in LA and San Francisco, they say, wait till you try this.
some big producer, famous producer, they don't enter competition for the fear.
Sure.
Not to be at the top. Let's keep that in mind. So to me, the Governor's Cup has a purpose, as much as has a purpose to have the group of wine writers. You do it in different areas, and I think Virginia should do that. They should continue to do that. Now, the big chateau in France, they don't send a competition.
They don't let you taste wine, yeah.
Right, but they send a private one-person taster, because that taster is going to always taste it, not blind, and always consistently give the high score, which I would argue with that another time for a different.
And relationships
Oh,
matter. You
tasting.
want,
Let's
you
start
want brand
tasting about
ambassadors.
tasting and
So,
scoring.
because
Yeah.
it becomes so subjective. There is no taster in the world that is objective.
But any industry, though,
As a
look at,
whole,
you look at Oregon. The joke is in Oregon that you've made it when you don't have to do the Governor's Cup anymore.
But
you
look
know-
at this. You say you agree to have a blind tasting. You brown bag. A competition is brown bagging based.
Oh, I agree with
So-
I agree with the principle of it. I just didn't. The main thing is the way the marketing board went around and introduced the wines to the writers, and that to me is one of the big. Just to send a case on there with no reference to me is not a way to build relationships.
I agree, and I think that's what's exciting for me, is developing the future of the relationship between our area and the wine region that we actually have here. And it's about developing relationships between restaurants, sommeliers, public, and the wineries, because I'll never be able to get out of living near a winery in my mind. It's one of the most dramatically beautiful and wonderful things you can ever be a part of, and the fact that most people that are right around here don't understand it is a shame. And I think that as time goes on, it'll start to develop, and you'll start to see it'll only develop the greater love and passion for wine in the region. And I think it's important. And I think with those relationships, we'll grow the recognition of Virginia actually being something that should be recognized as a proper wine-going region. It just needs a little time, a little cultivation, and a little bit of respect, from the people that live here.
Great. Well, thank you so much, guys. This was fun. We can get back to
Thank
work.
you.
Yeah.
This is really great.
It's great. Thank you.